Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like we're diving into the BABOK guide, version 3 today. So are you getting ready for a new project or maybe brushing up on those business analysis skills?
Well, the Bayback Guide really stresses that strategic thinking is at the heart of business analysis.
Oh, okay.
It's not just about, writing down requirements. It's about getting the bigger picture.
So we're talking the why behind the what.
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. But this guide, it's pretty intense. How do we even start to unpack all of this?
The guide emphasizes a holistic approach. It's about understanding those business needs, analyzing the current state and defining, that desired future state, and then figuring out how to get from here to there. It's like planning a road trip, right?
Right.
You wouldn't just hop in the car and start driving.
Definitely, man.
You need a destination, a route.
So the BABOK guide, it's kind of like our roadmap then.
Exactly. It's a framework that makes sure we consider all the crucial elements: stakeholder engagement, risk assessment, even the enterprise's limitations.
I see. So it's not just about getting things done, it's about getting the right things done in a way that makes sense for the whole organization.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, one of the first things that jumped out at me in the guide was this idea of looking at business needs from the perspective of the enterprise, not just like individual stakeholders.
Yeah.
There's even a quote that says, business needs are always expressed from the perspective of the enterprise and not that of any particular stakeholder. Why is that so important?
Well, that's a key point. You have to see the forest for the trees. Otherwise, you risk just solving a symptom,
Right.
not the root cause.
Oh, okay.
And, what's fascinating is this shift in perspective can actually lead to more innovative solutions.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine you're working with a sales team and they're requesting a new CRM system because they're having trouble keeping track of their leads.
Okay.
If you only focus on their need, right, you might just jump into like implementing a new CRM.
Okay.
But if you take a step back and you consider the enterprise perspective, you might realize that the real issue is a lack of communication between sales and marketing,
Ah, interesting.
leading to those unqualified leads even entering the CRM. So the solution might not be a new system at all, but actually a process improvement to get those teams aligned. That's where that bigger picture pays off.
Wow, that's a great example. So it's about understanding the underlying problems, not just the surface level symptoms, but with so many different stakeholders, how do you ensure you are getting that enterprise perspective?
Well, the guide really emphasizes the importance of stakeholder engagement, and it gives us some really useful techniques for doing that.
So it's more than just sending out a survey or having a quick meeting then.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
The guide encourages us to use tools like stakeholder lists, maps, and personas. So, for example, creating a stakeholder map can help you really see the relationships between different stakeholders, their influence, their impact on the project. And this can help you tailor your communication and engagement strategies.
So you're not just throwing darts in the dark and hoping you hit the right people.
No.
You're strategically picking who to involve and how to talk to them.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
And once you have a good grasp of who those stakeholders are and what the real business needs are, then you can move into planning.
Okay. And the BIBOK guide stresses the importance of planning, whether you're using, a predictive approach or an adaptive one.
Right.
What's the difference?
Well, think of a predictive approach like using a really detailed map. You have a set route.
Okay.
Whereas an adaptive approach is more like having a compass. You adjust your course as you encounter obstacles or discover new landmarks.
Oh, I like that. So predictive is about minimizing uncertainty by defining everything up front. Adaptive is about embracing that flexibility, responding to change as you go.
Exactly. And the choice of approach really depends on the project's complexity, how much uncertainty there is, and the organization's culture. But no matter what approach you choose, the guide highlights that planning is absolutely crucial.
Okay, so whether you're using a map or a compass, you need to know where you're going and have some idea of how to get there.
Exactly. And when you're figuring out the timing of your business analysis activities, there are several factors to juggle.
Yeah.
Do you have the right people available when you need them? How urgent is the initiative? Are there any external deadlines you need to meet?
Right. It sounds like a lot to balance.
It is.
But the guide provides a framework for thinking through all of these elements.
It does. And speaking of frameworks, the guide also talks about the BA's role in defining both requirements and designs.
Wait, I thought requirements and designs were handled by different people.
Well, they're distinct concepts.
Okay.
But the guide acknowledges that business analysts, they're involved in both.
Yeah.
The level of responsibility for the design might vary, but the BA's understanding of the business needs really helps shape the how along with the what.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you're working on like a new mobile app, understanding what the user needs and the business goals, that's going to inform not just the features, but also the design of the app, the user interface, and the navigation.
So the BA's insights are valuable throughout the whole process.
Exactly.
Okay.
And regardless of, how much you're involved in the design, one thing that remains constant is traceability.
Okay. Now, the guide mentions traceability a lot. Can you explain what that is and why it's so important?
Traceability is about connecting the dots between business needs, requirements, and designs. So let's say you're analyzing a change request for an online shopping cart. Traceability helps you quickly see what other system components might be affected by this change. Things like payment processing or inventory management.
Okay, so it's like a safety net
Yeah, it is.
to make sure nothing falls through the cracks. And the changes are made thoughtfully, strategically.
Exactly. And when you're managing, a complex project with a lot of moving parts, traceability helps you stay organized. And it ensures that everything is aligned with those overall goals.
That's really helpful. And speaking of keeping things aligned, the guide also talks about this need for continual prioritization. Why is that so important? I thought you just prioritize things once at the beginning and then you're good to go.
Well, in reality, it's not always that simple. Priorities can shift throughout an initiative.
Right?
Let's say you've prioritized a certain feature to be developed first, but then suddenly there's a change in market demand,
Yeah.
or a key resource becomes unavailable, or a new dependency pops up.
Oh, I see.
These factors might force you to reevaluate and adjust those priorities.
So you're constantly evaluating and reevaluating what's most important based on the current situation. It sounds like being a business analyst requires a lot of adaptability.
It does. The guide actually provides a structured approach for assessing the impact of proposed changes.
Okay.
So, for instance, if someone requests a new feature, you need to evaluate how that change, aligns with the overall value of the solution,
Yeah.
whether it conflicts with existing requirements and what risks it might introduce.
It's all about making informed decisions.
Right.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense. You can't just say yes to every shiny new idea that comes along.
Exactly.
Speaking of shiny new things, the guide also mentions the importance of solution evaluation. I'm guessing this is more than just checking a box and moving on.
It is.
Okay.
Solution evaluation is about making sure that what you've implemented actually delivers the value that you intended. It's about measuring performance against those goals. So think about a new feature for a mobile banking app.
Right.
A high-level acceptance criterion might be that 95% of users can successfully complete a mobile check deposit. But then a more detailed criterion might be that the app needs to load that deposit screen within 3 seconds. So these criteria help you objectively evaluate if that solution is actually meeting expectations.
So you're constantly looking for ways to improve and optimize based on real data and user feedback?
Exactly. Continuous improvement. That's a theme that runs throughout the guide. And that brings us to the rise of agile methodologies, which have really changed the landscape of software development.
Ah, Agile. I've heard a lot about it, but I always thought that was more of a developer thing. How does the BABOK guide address Agile approaches to bottles analysis?
Well, the guide has a whole section on how to tailor practices for those agile environments. And it highlights that the core principles of good business analysis, they still remain relevant.
Okay.
But your techniques and processes might need a little adjusting to fit the iterative nature of agile.
So it's not about throwing the BABOK guide out the window.
No.
It's about adapting its wisdom to this new way of working.
Exactly.
Okay. What kind of adaptations are we talking about?
Well, instead of, creating those detailed upfront requirements documents, you might use user stories to capture those user needs in a more concise and collaborative way. And instead of lengthy, infrequent meetings, you might have daily stand-ups or more frequent sprint reviews to keep everyone in sync.
I see. So it's about being more flexible, responsive, collaborative.
Exactly. And another area where business analysis is evolving is in the realm of business architecture.
Okay. I've heard the term business architecture before, but to be honest, it sounds a bit intimidating.
Right.
Can you break it down for me?
Imagine a blueprint for the entire organization.
Okay.
Business architecture shows how all the different parts of the business, they're connected, how they contribute to strategic objectives, and how they interact with each other.
So it's like a map of the entire business ecosystem.
That's a great way to put it. And the BABOK guide highlights how crucial this is for aligning strategic objectives with tactical demands.
Right? You don't want to build a beautiful bridge to nowhere. You got to make sure your efforts are aligned with the overall direction of the organization.
Exactly. And beyond those um, technical aspects of business analysis, the guide really emphasizes the human element as well.
Okay, that sounds more my speed. What does the guide say about, like, the importance of people in business analysis?
Hmm. Well, it highlights those core competencies like analytical thinking, communication skills, and problem solving. You need to be able to grasp complex business problems and communicate solutions effectively. But it also goes beyond that and stresses those behavioral characteristics like ethics, personal accountability, and adaptability.
So it's not just about being a technical whiz.
Right.
It's also about being a strong communicator, a collaborator, and a bit of a chameleon.
Yes. Building trust with stakeholders is essential. They need to feel confident that you'll represent their needs accurately, communicate transparently, and act ethically.
That makes perfect sense. And all of these skills and behaviors, they're essential for navigating that wide range of techniques that the BABOK guide outlines. We're talking about everything from brainstorming and document analysis to data modeling and decision analysis.
That's right. The whole toolbox of techniques, and choosing the right ones really depends on the specific context of the project and the needs of the stakeholders.
Well, I'm definitely eager to hear more about these techniques. How about we take a little breather and pick up with part 2 of our deep dive?
Sounds like a plan. We'll continue our exploration then.
Welcome back. We were just getting started on those different techniques in the BABOK guide. It's like having a whole toolbox at our disposal.
It is. And just like any toolbox, the key is knowing which tool is right for the job.
Right.
So for instance, data modeling is a really powerful technique for, describing the information that's crucial to a business.
Data modeling. Okay. I'll admit that sounds a bit technical. Can you make it relatable for someone who might not be a data expert?
Absolutely. Think of it like creating a blueprint for how information is structured and connected. Let's say you're working on a project for a music streaming service.
Right.
You might have entities like artist, song, and playlist.
Okay.
Each entity has specific attributes,
Right.
right? So an artist might have a name, a genre, and a discography. And then there are relationships between those entities. A song belongs to an artist and can be added to multiple playlists.
So data modeling helps you create like a shared understanding of what information is important and how it all fits together.
Exactly. And that shared understanding is crucial for designing effective systems and making sure everyone is working with, the same definitions.
I can see how that would be particularly important when you're dealing with like complex systems or massive amounts of data.
Right. It helps you make sense of the chaos and avoid misunderstandings.
Now, this reminds me of another technique we briefly touched on earlier, concept modeling. They seem kind of similar. What's the difference between data modeling and concept modeling?
That's a great question. While they are related, concept modeling focuses more on the business vocabulary and ensuring everyone is speaking the same language.
Okay.
It's about establishing those clear definitions for key terms and concepts. Think of it like creating a project dictionary, which can be really useful when, you have stakeholders who come from different departments, and they might be using the same word in different ways.
So it's about getting everyone on the same page from the start.
Right.
Okay. Which I imagine can help avoid some confusion and costly misinterpretations later on.
It does. It's all about clear communication and shared understanding.
Speaking of understanding, the guide also mentions decision analysis as a technique. I'm guessing this goes beyond just like flipping a coin.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Decision analysis provides a structured way to assess a problem, evaluate your choices, and chart the best course of action. It helps you weigh those risks and rewards associated with different decisions. It's especially helpful when you're facing a complex situation with a lot of uncertainty.
So it's like a supercharged pro-con list.
That's a good way to think about it, but it goes beyond just listing pros and cons.
Right.
Decision analysis involves identifying the key factors that are influencing the decision, brainstorming those possible alternatives, evaluating the potential consequences of each alternative, and then finally selecting the best option based on, predefined criteria.
That sounds incredibly valuable, especially for making those tough calls where the answer isn't obvious. Does the guide offer any real-world examples of how this is used?
Absolutely. Imagine a company trying to decide whether to invest in a new manufacturing facility.
Okay.
Decision analysis would help them consider things like market demand, production costs, potential risks, the financial impact of different locations. By systematically evaluating all these factors, they can make a more informed and strategic decision.
That's a great example. So it takes the emotion out of the equation and allows for a more objective, data-driven approach. Now, I'm also curious about decision modeling. Is that the same thing as decision analysis?
While both deal with decisions, they have different focuses. Decision modeling is about capturing the logic and rules behind repeatable business decisions, often visualized like in a diagram or a flowchart. Think of it as creating like a clear recipe or set of instructions for making those recurring decisions.
So if decision analysis is about making a one-time complex decision, decision modeling is about creating a system for consistently making the same type of decision.
Yeah, you got it. And this is especially valuable when you're looking to, automate decisions or build systems that need to make choices based on those predefined rules. So for instance, an insurance company might use decision modeling to automate the process of approving or denying claims based on specific criteria.
That makes a lot of sense. It helps ensure consistency, transparency, and efficiency. Now, I've always believed that learning from the past is crucial. Does the BABOK guide address this in any way?
It absolutely does. The guide dedicates a whole section to the lessons learned technique. It encourages us to review past projects, both successful and unsuccessful ones, to identify what worked, what didn't work, and how we can improve in the future.
So it's about taking the time to reflect and extract those valuable insights from past experiences.
Precisely. Lessons learned can help us refine our processes, identify potential risks, and make more informed decisions moving forward. So, for example, if a previous project experienced significant delays because of, let's say, scope creep, we can use that lesson to implement stricter scope management practices in future projects.
So it's about turning those oops moments into valuable learning opportunities.
Exactly. And speaking of learning opportunities, let's move on to a technique that often involves sifting through a lot of information. Document analysis.
Document analysis. That sounds pretty straightforward. I mean, we all read documents, right?
It's more than just passively reading.
Okay.
Document analysis is about strategically extracting information from existing documentation to understand, like the current state, identify key facts, and uncover valuable insights. It's like being a detective piecing together clues from various sources.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What kind of documents are we talking about, and how do you actually go about analyzing them effectively?
Well, it could be anything from process documentation and business plans to, meeting minutes and market research reports. The key is to have a clear purpose for your analysis. What are you trying to find? What questions are you trying to answer? Once you know that, then you can use techniques like highlighting key information, creating summaries, and looking for patterns or contradictions.
So it's about having a focused approach and really engaging with material.
Exactly. And this technique can be incredibly valuable, especially in those early stages of a project when you're trying to, get up to speed quickly or understand the context of a problem.
Makes sense. Now, I'm also curious about estimation. Is that something the BABOK guide covers?
It certainly does. Estimation is the process of, determining an approximate value for something, whether it's the time, the cost, or the effort needed to complete a task or project.
So it's about making educated guesses about what's going to happen in the future.
Well, it's more than just guessing.
Okay.
It involves leveraging, historical data, expert judgment, and various techniques to come up with a reasonable estimate. And the key is to document your assumptions and be transparent about the level of uncertainty involved.
So you're not just pulling numbers out of thin air, you're using data and logic to make informed predictions. And I imagine this becomes even more important when you're dealing with large-scale projects or significant investments.
Absolutely. Accurate estimation helps manage expectations, allocate resources effectively, and, avoid those costly surprises down the line.
That makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't want to start building a house without having a realistic idea of, how much it's going to cost and how long it will take.
Precisely.
Sure.
Now, speaking of costs and investments, financial analysis is another crucial technique in the BABOK guide.
Okay. Financial analysis, that one sounds pretty serious. Is this something that all business analysts need to be, experts in?
Well, you don't need to be a financial wizard, but understanding the financial implications of projects and solutions, that's essential.
Okay.
Financial analysis helps you determine whether the benefits outweigh the costs and whether a project is a wise investment for the organization.
So it's about making sure that that the projects we undertake make financial sense and actually contribute to the organization's bottom line.
Exactly. And this might involve calculating, return on investment, assessing that cost-benefit ratio, or projecting future cash flows. The key is to use these financial metrics to inform your decision-making and make sure that the projects you choose align with those overall financial goals.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to embark on a project that drains resources without delivering tangible value.
Absolutely. Financial analysis helps make sure we're being good stewards of those resources. Now, let's shift gears a bit and talk about getting direct feedback from stakeholders. The BABOK guide discusses the technique of focus groups.
Okay, focus groups. I've definitely heard of those. It's about bringing people together to get their opinions on something, right?
That's right. A focus group is a facilitated group discussion
Right.
where a moderator, guides the participants through a set of questions or topics to gather feedback, insights, and perspectives.
So it's like a group interview, but a little bit more interactive and dynamic.
Exactly. Focus groups can be incredibly valuable when you're trying to, understand the customer needs, evaluate product concepts, or test marketing messages.
I can see how that would be helpful. You get to hear from like multiple people at once, observe how they interact with each other, and you can potentially uncover insights that you might not get from individual interviews.
Precisely. And the guide gives some really helpful tips for planning and conducting those focus groups effectively. Things like choosing the right participants, developing a clear discussion guide, and creating a comfortable and open environment for sharing feedback.
Yeah, you want to make sure that people feel comfortable expressing their honest opinions.
Exactly. And speaking of breaking things down, let's move on to functional decomposition.
Functional decomposition. That sounds a little technical. Can you break it down for me? Literally and figuratively.
So functional decomposition, it's about dissecting a complex system or process into smaller, more manageable parts. It's like taking apart a clock to understand how each, gear and spring contributes to its overall function.
So it's about simplifying complex things by looking at them in smaller pieces.
Precisely. And this can be incredibly helpful when you're, analyzing a complicated system.
Yeah.
Or you're designing a new solution, or even when you're troubleshooting a problem.
I can see how that would be useful. It's like that old saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time?
That's a great analogy. Functional decomposition allows us to, tackle those complex problems in a structured and systematic way. And, when you're dealing with a lot of technical terms and jargon, having that clear understanding of the language is crucial. Does the guide touch on that at all?
It does. The guide stresses the importance of creating a glossary for your project.
Yes.
Okay, a glossary. So that's like a mini dictionary for the project,
Right.
but with a focus on the business terminology.
Exactly. A glossary makes sure that everyone is using the same language and understanding terms consistently. And that's especially important when you have stakeholders from different backgrounds or departments who might be using the same word in different ways.
That makes a lot of sense. It's all about clear communication and avoiding those lost in translation moments. Now, I'm also curious about interviews. Are those still relevant in today's fast-paced world?
Oh, absolutely. Interviews remain a cornerstone of business analysis. They allow us to gather that, in-depth information from stakeholders by asking targeted questions and actively listening to their responses.
So it's more than just firing off a list of questions. There's an art to conducting effective interviews.
Definitely. The BABOK guide offers a lot of great advice on how to plan, conduct, and document interviews effectively. It emphasizes the importance of establishing rapport, asking those open-ended questions that encourage detailed responses, and of course, actively listening to really understand the stakeholder's perspective.
So it's about building that connection, creating that safe space for sharing information, and really trying to understand, the needs, the concerns, and the goals of the stakeholders.
Precisely. Effective interviews are crucial for gathering accurate requirements, identifying those potential risks, and building consensus among stakeholders.
And when it comes to gathering information, metrics and data play a crucial role. Is there a technique in the BABOK guide that addresses this?
There is. Metrics and Key Performance Indicators, or KPIs, is a technique that's all about using data to understand and improve performance.
Okay, metrics and KPIs. I hear those terms all the time. Honestly, I'm not always sure what the difference is.
So a metric is simply a measurement of something. A KPI, on the other hand, is a specific type of metric that is directly tied to a strategic objective or goal. Think of it this way. All KPIs are metrics, but not all metrics are KPIs.
Ah, so a KPI is a metric that really matters. It's a
Yes,
measurement that tells you how you're doing in terms of achieving your goals.
that's a great way to put it. And the guide emphasizes the importance of choosing KPIs that are, relevant, measurable, and aligned with those strategic objectives.
That makes sense. You wouldn't want to track metrics that don't actually tell you anything about, like, the performance of your business or project.
Exactly.
Oh.
Now, speaking of making things visual, the BABOK guide also discusses the technique of mind mapping.
Okay, mind mapping. I've played around with those before. It's about creating a visual representation of your ideas, right?
That's right. Mind mapping is a visual brainstorming technique, helps generate and organize ideas. It's about starting with a central topic and branching out to related ideas and subtopics, creating a sort of tree diagram for your brain.
I love how visual it is. It's much more engaging than just writing a list, and it allows you to see the connections between ideas more easily.
Exactly. And it can be a fantastic way to, engage stakeholders in brainstorming sessions
Mhm.
and encourage that creative thinking. Now, we've talked a lot about functional requirements, the things that a system needs to do, but what about the quality attributes of a system? How does the guide address that?
Yeah.
So the guide has a section dedicated to non-functional requirements analysis. These requirements define those quality attributes of a system or solution. Things like performance, security, usability, and reliability.
So it's not just about what the system does, it's about how well it does it.
Exactly. Non-functional requirements, those are crucial because they can make or break the success of a solution. A system that's slow, unreliable, or difficult to use, it's not likely to be adopted, even if it has all the right features.
That's a great point. You could have the best features in the world, but if the system is clunky and frustrating to use, no one's going to want to use it.
Precisely. And the BABOK guide highlights how important it is to elicit and document those non-functional requirements early on to avoid those pitfalls.
Now, sometimes the best way to understand something is to simply observe it in action. Does the guide offer any techniques for that?
It does. Observation is a technique where you watch people perform their work to understand their processes, their challenges, and their needs. It's about getting that firsthand information about how things actually work rather than just relying on what people tell you.
So you're like a fly on the wall,
Yeah,
observing people in their natural habitat.
that's a good way to put it. Observation can be incredibly valuable for uncovering, hidden inefficiencies, identifying potential risks, and understanding user behavior.
It's about seeing the reality of how things work, not just the idealized version that people might describe.
Exactly. And this can lead to more insightful analysis and more effective solutions.
Now, I'm also curious about how you visualize the structure of an organization. Is there a technique for that? There is. Organizational modeling involves creating a visual representation of an organization's structure, roles, responsibilities, and relationships. So it's like creating a map of the org chart,
Yeah.
but with more detail.
Exactly. This can be incredibly valuable for, understanding the impact of a proposed change, identifying potential stakeholders,
Hmm.
and tailoring your communication strategies for different parts of the organization.
I can see how that would be helpful,
Yeah,
especially for navigating those complexities of large organizations.
absolutely. And speaking of processes, let's move on to process analysis.
Okay, process analysis. I'm guessing this is about more than just creating a to-do list.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Okay.
Process analysis involves understanding how a process works, identifying areas for improvement, and designing those more efficient and effective ways of doing things.
So it's about taking a step back and looking at the big picture of how work gets done.
Precisely. And this can involve mapping out the steps in a process, identifying the inputs and outputs, and analyzing the flow of information and resources.
I can see how this would be valuable for like streamlining operations and improving productivity.
Exactly. And speaking of visualizing processes, process modeling takes this a step further. It involves creating a visual representation of a process, often using flowcharts or diagrams.
So you're creating a blueprint that clearly shows how the process works.
Right. Process modeling can be a powerful tool for communicating how those processes work, identifying potential areas for improvement, and even training new employees.
It's like having like a visual instruction manual. Now, when you're designing new systems or solutions, it's important to get feedback early on,
Yes,
right? Does the guide have any techniques for that?
it does. Prototyping is a technique where you create a working model of a system or a solution, even if it's a simple version, to test its feasibility, get feedback, and refine that design before you commit to a final product.
So you're not trying to build the perfect solution right away. You're building like a quick and dirty version
Yeah,
just to get a feel for how it works and to get feedback from users.
exactly. Prototyping can help identify those potential problems early on, reduce risk, and make sure that final solution is meeting the needs of the stakeholders.
It's like creating a rough draft
Yeah.
to get feedback and make improvements
Okay.
before you invest in the final version.
And speaking of making sure things are on track, the guide also emphasizes the importance of reviews.
Reviews, like performance reviews.
Not quite. In the context of business analysis, reviews are about formally evaluating work products, like, requirements, documents, or design specifications, to identify errors, omissions, or areas for improvement.
So you're not just moving on to the next step without making sure that what you've done so far is accurate and complete.
Right. And the BABOK guide describes different types of reviews, from like informal walkthroughs to more formal inspections. And
Okay.
often, those reviews involve multiple stakeholders and subject matter experts, just to make sure that work is being evaluated from different perspectives.
It's like having a fresh pair of eyes look over your work to catch any potential issues.
Exactly. And speaking of catching those potential issues before they become problems, let's talk about risk analysis and management.
Okay, risk analysis. That sounds pretty important. What does it entail?
Risk analysis is about identifying those potential risks that could threaten the success of a project or a solution. It's about proactively assessing their likelihood and impact, and then developing strategies to mitigate them.
So it's about anticipating those potential problems and having a plan to address them, rather than just hoping for the best.
Exactly. And the guide provides a structured framework for systematically identifying, assessing, and managing those risks.
And I imagine this involves considering like a wide range of risks, both internal and external.
You got it. So it could be anything from like technical challenges and resource constraints to changes in market conditions or regulatory requirements.
It's about being aware of all the potential pitfalls and having a plan to navigate them. Now, earlier we talked about the importance of scope in project planning. Does the BBAC guide offer any techniques specifically for managing scope?
It does. Scope modeling is all about defining and documenting the boundaries of a project or solution. It's about clearly articulating what's included in the project and, just as importantly, what is not included.
So it's about setting those clear expectations and avoiding scope creep,
Yes.
where the project just keeps expanding.
Exactly. Scope modeling is essential for managing expectations, controlling costs, and keeping that project on track. Now, we've talked about a lot of different components of a system, but how do you visualize the interactions between those components?
The guide offers a technique called sequence diagrams for that.
Okay.
Sequence diagrams, what are those?
Think of it like a storyboard that shows how, objects in a system interact with each other over time. It shows the flow of messages and the interactions between different components.
So it helps you understand the sequence of events
Yeah.
and how the different parts work together.
Exactly. Sequence diagrams are really helpful when you're designing those complex systems or processes that have multiple interactions. They can also help identify potential bottlenecks or areas where, communication could break down.
That makes a lot of sense. And speaking of understanding how people interact with the system, are there any techniques for identifying and engaging with stakeholders?
There is. Stakeholder analysis is a key technique for identifying those individuals or groups that have an interest in the project or solution, assessing their level of influence, and then developing strategies to engage them effectively.
So it's about figuring out who cares about this project, what are their needs, what are their expectations, and how to communicate with them in a way that resonates.
You got it. Stakeholder analysis is crucial for building consensus, managing expectations, and making sure the project is delivering value to the right people. Now, sometimes things are a bit more complicated than a simple, yes or no. How do you model those situations where things can change over time?
The guide addresses this with the state modeling technique. This is about describing and analyzing the different possible states of an entity within a system, how that entity transitions between those states, and what happens in each state. So think about modeling the status of an online order. It could move from placed to processing to shipped and finally, delivered, with each state having its own set of conditions and triggers.
So you're not just looking at a static snapshot, you're looking at the life cycle of the entity and the factors that influence its transitions.
Precisely. State modeling can be incredibly helpful when you're dealing with systems that have, those complex rules or behaviors. Now, gathering feedback from a wider audience can be incredibly valuable. Does the guide address that?
It does. Surveys or questionnaires is a technique that's used to collect information from a larger group of people using a standardized set of questions.
So it's like a written interview, but with a broader reach.
Exactly. Surveys and questionnaires are great for gathering quantitative data about stakeholder needs, preferences, and opinions.
I can see how that would be helpful for like identifying trends, patterns, areas of consensus, or even disagreement.
Exactly. And the guide provides guidance on, how to design those surveys and questionnaires effectively. Things like choosing the right questions, making sure they're clear and concise, and analyzing the data effectively. Now, when it comes to making those strategic decisions, sometimes you need to look at the big picture. Does the guide have any techniques to help with that?
It does. SWOT analysis is a technique for assessing an organization's current situation by identifying its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats.
Ah, SWOT analysis.
Yeah.
Heard of that one. It's about taking a comprehensive look at both internal and external factors that could affect an organization.
Precisely. A SWOT analysis helps you understand the organization's competitive landscape, identify potential strategies for leveraging those strengths, addressing weaknesses, capitalizing on opportunities, and of course, mitigating threats. It's a valuable tool for, brainstorming new ideas, making those strategic decisions, and developing action plans.
It's like a strategic compass
Yeah.
guiding you towards a successful future.
That's a great analogy. And speaking of understanding how users interact with the system, the BABOK guide discusses use cases and scenarios.
Okay.
What are those all about?
So a use case describes a series of interactions between a user and a system to achieve a specific goal. It outlines, how a user interacts with the system to accomplish a task. A scenario, on the other hand, is a specific instance of a use case, outlining a particular path through that use case.
So it's about documenting how, users will actually use the system
Yeah,
in real-world situations.
exactly. Use cases and scenarios are powerful tools for understanding user needs, identifying those potential usability problems, and designing systems that are functional and user-friendly.
It's like creating, a story
Yeah,
about how someone might interact with the system to achieve a goal.
that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah.
And these stories help ensure the system is actually designed to meet the needs of the users.
Now, when you're looking for, external partners or solutions, it's important to choose the right one. Does the guide address that?
It does. Vendor assessment is a technique for evaluating potential vendors
Okay.
to determine, their capability to meet the needs of the project or solution.
So it's about more than just going with the lowest bidder.
Right. Vendor assessment involves considering things like the vendor's experience, their expertise, their financial stability, their track record.
Right.
It's about mitigating risk and making sure you're choosing the right partner.
Makes sense. And sometimes the best way to get things done is to just bring everyone together. Does the BABOK guide have any techniques for that?
Absolutely. Workshops are a powerful technique for bringing those stakeholders together to collaborate on a specific task or goal. They can be used for brainstorming, gathering requirements, developing solutions, or even building consensus.
So it's about harnessing that collective wisdom of the group
Yeah.
and fostering a sense of ownership over the solution.
Exactly. Workshops can be incredibly productive when they're well-planned and facilitated, creating that environment for open communication, creative problem-solving, and collaborative decision-making. It's amazing how many different techniques the BABOK Guide covers. We've gone from data modeling and decision analysis to stakeholder engagement and so much more. It really shows how broad business analysis is.
It does. And it's
Yeah.
important to remember that this is really just a glimpse into the BABOK guide. There's so much more to explore.
Well, I'm definitely ready for more.
Yeah.
How about we wrap up this deep dive in part 3 where we tie everything together and leave our listener with some key takeaways.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to bringing it all together.
Welcome back to our final deep dive into the BABOK Guide. It's been quite a journey exploring the world of business analysis.
It really has. We've covered a lot of ground, from understanding the why behind business analysis to unpacking that toolbox full of techniques.
And of course, we can't forget about stakeholder engagement.
Absolutely, that's key. It seems like stakeholder engagement is a theme that runs throughout the BABOK guide.
It really is woven into the fabric of doing successful business analysis. It's about understanding, who your stakeholders are, what they need and expect, and how to best communicate with them throughout the project.
As we've been talking, I keep thinking back to those two approaches to business analysis, predictive and adaptive. We touched on them briefly earlier, but I'm wondering how they play out in the real world. Does the guide offer any insights into choosing the right approach for a given situation?
It does. Choosing between a predictive and adaptive approach is a crucial decision. The guide emphasizes that there's no one-size-fits-all answer. The best approach depends on a number of factors, like the complexity of the project, the level of uncertainty, the organization's culture, and even the industry you're working in.
So it's not a simple either choice. There's a lot of nuance involved. Can you give me some examples of when one approach might be more suitable than the other?
Sure. Imagine you're working on a project to develop a new mobile banking app. In this case, an adaptive approach might be more suitable because the world of mobile technology is constantly evolving. User needs can change rapidly, and new competitors are emerging all the time. An adaptive approach lets you be more flexible, respond to changes quickly, and incorporate user feedback throughout development.
That makes sense. You need to be able to pivot and adjust as you go to stay ahead of the curve.
Exactly. Now, let's say you're working on a project to implement a new regulatory compliance system for a financial institution. In this case, a predictive approach might be more appropriate because the requirements are likely to be well-defined, the timeline might be fixed, and there's less room for flexibility. A predictive approach allows you to plan meticulously upfront, minimize risk, and ensure the system meets all those compliance requirements.
So the key is to carefully consider the specific context of the project and choose the approach that best aligns with the needs and constraints of the situation.
Precisely. And the BABOK guide gives us a framework for thinking through those factors and making that informed decision.
That's helpful. Throughout our deep dive, we've talked about a variety of techniques, but it occurs to me that there's also a very human side to business analysis. The guide even mentions the importance of ethics and professional responsibility. Can you talk a bit more about that?
That's a crucial aspect of business analysis that's often overlooked. Business analysts have access to sensitive information and are involved in making decisions that can significantly impact stakeholders. It's imperative that we act with integrity, honesty, and respect for everyone involved.
So it's about more than just following the rules or avoiding legal trouble. It's about making decisions that are aligned with your values and that benefit the organization and its stakeholders in a responsible and ethical way.
Exactly. The guide outlines a set of ethical principles for business analysts, like maintaining confidentiality, avoiding conflicts of interest, and acting with fairness and objectivity. It emphasizes the importance of transparency, honesty, and accountability in all our interactions.
It's like a moral compass guiding business analysts to make the right choices, even in challenging situations.
That's a great way to put it. And building trust is an essential part of ethical behavior. When stakeholders trust you, they're more likely to be open and honest with you, which leads to better requirements, better solutions, and ultimately better outcomes for everyone.
I can see how that would be incredibly important. You can't really be an effective business analyst if you don't have the trust and respect of the people you're working with.
Exactly. And speaking of effectiveness, the BABOK guide is more than just a technical manual. It's also a guide to professional development for business analysts.
That's an interesting perspective. What do you mean by that?
It provides a framework for understanding the skills, knowledge, and behaviors that are essential for success in this field. It encourages us to continuously learn and grow, staying up to date with the latest trends and best practices, and seeking opportunities to expand our knowledge and expertise.
So it's not just about learning how to use a specific set of tools, it's about developing a well-rounded skill set that includes things like communication, collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, and ethical decision making.
Precisely. The BABOK guide emphasizes that business analysis is a constantly evolving field, and those who embrace lifelong learning and professional development will be best equipped to thrive in this dynamic environment.
It's like having a roadmap for building a successful and fulfilling career in business analysis. It shows you where you are, where you want to go, and how to get there.
That's a fantastic way to put it. I think that's a perfect note to end our deep dive on.
I agree. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you now have a better understanding of what business analysis is all about, the key concepts and techniques involved, and the importance of ethics, professional development, and stakeholder engagement.
If there's one thing to take away from our exploration, it's that business analysis is about more than just gathering requirements and documenting processes. It's about understanding the why behind the what, thinking strategically, adapting to change, and finding solutions that deliver real value to organizations and their stakeholders.
So if you're about to embark on a business analysis project, remember what we've talked about today. Think about those business needs, the stakeholders involved, and the desired outcomes. And don't forget, the BABOK guide is there to guide you every step of the way.
And one final thought to leave you with. As you navigate the world of business analysis, don't be afraid to challenge assumptions, think creatively, and push the boundaries. After all, that's how true innovation happens.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and helpful. Until next time, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.